Signore e signori, buonasera, benvenuti, bentornati alla Casa Italiana Zerilli-Marimò della New York University. This is our first event for this academic year, and we are delighted to start it with all of you, and especially with Francesca Cadel, the author of the book we are presenting tonight. You might have seen that we are trying to change a few things. First of all, to entertain you while you wait for the event to begin, and since we have what we believe is a remarkable collection of videos, day by day, we will propose to you something that we have produced in the past. Normally, there is going to be one parola from our 250 words that we assessed with presentations ranging from 1 minute to a minute and a half. One Italian site in New York, a place in which the presence of Italians is still alive today, and then one of our other documentary productions. By the way, our friends that are the filmmakers here at the Casa, and you have seen also this evening the highlights of our production for the past 2 years. You have seen a short documentary for the Department of Italian Studies, Auen Film. If I tell you Auen Film, you don't know who they are. If I showed you their faces, you would recognize them because you see them here every day when we have events to record, photograph, and so on and so forth. So these, I say kids, but these group of remarkable young people actually just was in Venice, where their last film dedicated to Elvira Notari, the first Italian woman director, was presented in concorso for the section of the Venice Film Festival dedicated to documentaries on cinema. And I was there, and it was a great joy for me to see that what they started here, moving around in the world of cinema, cinematography, videography, has developed and continues to develop. Chiusa la parentesi. This evening we present a book by Francesca Cadel. Francesca is here with us. She had a New York period during which I met her, and we were together. There were students from Columbia, NYU, CUNY, and so we have a lot in common. And I had the privilege and the fortune to sort of witness the gestazione, the development of this research project in Francesca, and to see her enthusiasm and the passion when she discovered a new piece in an archive, a letter, a piece of diary, an article, a painting, and to listen from her how every single step in the research of this film was something that motivated her, gave her great enthusiasm and more determination in exploring a field that is the political history of Italy through the lens of literature. That is a very, very special way of looking at history, right? It's not at all for granted. And she tackled some of the major questions in contemporary Italian history. And I'm not going to steal the work from the colleagues that have accepted to engage in a dialogue with Francesca tonight. And Francesca taught for many years at the University of Calgary, and she was just appointed full professor at the University of Pordenone, Udine, where she will start in September. It's homecoming, right, Francesca? Dal Friuli torni al tuo Friuli dopo tutti questi giri per il mondo. With her tonight we have Alessandro Giammei. Alessandro also had the New York period here at the Casa, and now he's a professor at Yale University. His interests range from contemporary literature, literary theory, and many more things. He has done a lot of incredible work at Yale to rejuvenate, may I say that without offending anybody? Yeah. Yeah, okay. Because both Francesca and Giuseppe had un pezzo di storia a Yale, anche, ovviamente. And Giuseppe Gazzola from SUNY Stony Brook. He's also an expert in contemporary Italian culture, contemporary Italian literature, and also he's responsible for the archives related to some of the characters that Francesca has studied. So he also witnessed the development of this book and of this research project. So we have a lot to say and a lot to hear, and I invite our friends, Francesca Cadel, Giuseppe Gazzola, and Alessandro Giammei to please come to the stage. Magari Francesca si mette in mezzo. While they take the microphone, We have a few copies of Francesca Cadel's book, Dai Quaranta, Settanta, 8 copies. They're upstairs if you're interested in buying copies of Francesca Cadel. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefano, and thank you all. I see you very many here today. I would like to start following up on what Stefano just said, because this is a book that basically took many years of my life, but there was a moment where really I had a sort of revelation, and it was during the pandemic when I personally discovered Pietro di Donato. So originally I moved to the US in '97 to study at CUNY, and I was actually an adjunct at Queen's College, so mea culpa, I didn't know Pietro di Donato. And so actually, how did I encounter Pietro? I was into Roth and this interview to Primo Levi, and then from there I found this meeting they had at Yeshiva University with Ralph Ellison, Roth, and Pietro di Donato, and I was stunned by this individual just by his picture. I didn't know really that much. From there, my son is a witness, a sort of a fever came, and I plunged into his work, and I end up finding this painting, a painting that was a portrait of Aldo Moro, illustrating these oddest stories of all, Christ in Plastic, a story Pietro wrote in Italy, in Rome, during the kidnapping of Aldo Moro. And this painting, which is, for the generation of Stefano and myself, a sort of liberation from the image of the corpse of Aldo Moro, the president of the Christian Democrat in the Renault 4. And so that painting, it's the only picture in color in the book, gives Moro all his, even sensuality. Then I interviewed the painter who, thank God, is still alive, Wilson McLean, born 1937, amazing illustrator. So from there, basically, I moved back, and I found out during the pandemic, through my amazing librarian at University of Calgary, the amazing archive they have at Stony Brook, and a wonderful librarian, Kristen Mitre, and her assistant, amazing. And so I was able to work during the pandemic because they sent me this unpublished text, Moro, that was finished in 1979. And I was like, the fever was very high for a while. And so I was allowed by the Sons to translate this text and publish. And basically, it ended up being, as my colleague probably will say or notice, no conclusion to the book. My book started back even when I was teaching at Yale and at Columbia, a seminar on Morante, Pasolini, and Saba. So I had published a lot, and there is all that, but really the encounter with Pietro di Donato and the energy of his witnessing something that was part of my life became the engine, I would say, of the end of the book and finishing this book. And I don't know if you have questions, but really the book starts with Umberto Saba that has been translated here, but not completely. No. And so probably we'll discuss about the Scorciatoie e Raccontini, shortcuts and short tales that are a very important narrative at the beginning of the book. Then I moved to Pasolini that has been, as Stefano said, I grew up in Friuli, and so for me Pasolini is really part of everything I know. Also the language, Friulian language, is part of the tradition of the territory, the tradition of my family that also had a painter and a poet in this language. So that was almost, those who have read and discussed the book use the word anomaly, but they also recognize this sort of inevitable spina dorsale that is Pasolini's kind of legacy. And then Morante. Morante, I am very grateful to the colleagues with whom I worked together, Emanuele Gragnolati, on Araceli, which is not exactly the most known or pleasant novel Elsa Morante wrote, but it's an amazing novel. We can discuss that further. And finally, the last chapter is Di Donato. And also one thing I would like to say, to tell you how much this is a work of a long time, many years, because there is a very important discussion we had in Berlin with Antonio Negri and Emanuele Gragnolati on Petrolio. So it was a series of conferences devoted to Pasolini, and this was a sort of a climax, inviting Negri in Berlin at the ECI Berlin in, I think, 2012. And in my experience, which is due of my age or due of my obsession with Pasolini, a deep experience of Pasolini, there is, in my readings, no clearer reading of Petrolio from, let's say, I would use maybe an old term, a historicistic point of view. That's what really Negri does, because they never met, Pasolini and Negri, but they were sort of contemporary. Pasolini was born the year Negri's sister was born. He was born 1933. But so there is a lot in common. And so that common was relevant to his reading of Petrolio in the book. So I don't know if I can go on with other.
I actually will piggyback on this. Because of all the positive notes that can be said about this book, about its marginality, about its starting from the periphery to travel around and end again in the peripheries of the empire, in this case, the peripheries of the brick workers, the mason layers. But speaking of literature, this book, I think, is going to be very important because it is the first book, among all the other things that can be said, which we'll be saying, don't worry. But the most important thing is that it finally locates Petrolio in the theory of the Italian novel, not just in a marginal point, but as an essential point of arrival of a tradition and of the modernist tradition, and as the hinge of Italian novel writing of the 20th century. And since because of its late appearance on the scene, it hasn't been located yet critically, culturally. But apart from, say, Il pasticciaccio brutto di Via Merulana, and I would say, what else? Well, probably Sommo Morante, and Il nome della rosa, okay. But then Petrolio is a fundamental novel of the Italian Novecento. And this is something that Mazzoni needs to add to his history of the novel, right? And Francesca is the first one who, starting from her personal canon that she has carved in all these years of studying and teaching, this is the elephant in the room, I'd say, the thing that needs to be noticed, because not because just Francesca is a great reader of the novel, but because the novel hasn't taken its position in history of literature. Do you have a reaction to this?
Well, thank you for what you say, and I have to tell you, I am very grateful because I don't know if Anne Goldstein is here, but she translated Petrolio in English, and I think that's amazing. And even in English, you can appreciate how exhilarating Petrolio can be. Of course, you need, I think you need to let go with the worry of understanding, let's say, Italian politics, this and that, the sexuality, the thing. But the way Pasolini really insisted in following what he used to call his Mozart at least aspiration to be light, as in Mozart he would say. Well, I find Petrolio really exhilarating, especially in the part I analyze the passage with the suitcases, the intellectual from the left and the policeman, and then this entire, which is highly philosophical in the text. So the paradox of the written language of the political reports and reality, facts. So specifically up to a certain point, the facts of, massacres, state massacre, all that. So very heavy stuff. At the same time, he manages to build a theory that is hermeneutic. He quotes Pound on the levity, hilaritas, this and that, or other quotes that insist on techne, yes, you need to know how to write a novel, and he has the paradox of saying, I didn't mean to write a readable text. That's not my aspiration. But that's actually, even if it is heavy, and probably heavier in English than in Italian, to acknowledge this sort of paradox he, to me, successfully represented at least. The paradox between the language of secrecy, which is no language, and there are all the quotes, Freud, that page is amazing, and the language, the police language, the language of police reports, and the language of those who share the secret. So I thank you for your comment on the book.
Well, let me just say that one needs to come to Casa Italiana to hear a professor of literature say, I find Petrolio by Pasolini to be an exhilarating book. It's amazing. It's an amazing, it
not
really,
all the time, but
not typical, right? But I actually remember, as Stefano said, I was here for a semester during my graduate studies semester. It changed my life. And I took a class on Pasolini here. And I remember one of the first things that Professor Aramerjan told us, like, and Salò is such a funny movie. And I was like, what? Like, we're not trained in Italy to, like, I'm an Italianist. I did all my studies except for that little period in Italy. And we're not trained to look at things the way Francesca Cadel looks at her personal canon, as Giuseppe said. It's a kind of oblique gaze, not oblique. It's a misto gaze. No, a key word in this book is misto. It means it's untranslatable. It means mixed, but it's a racial slur in early 20th century Italy, and then it becomes a point of pride. It has to do with race and ethnicity, with religion, with geography, with sexuality, and with also literary style. Petrolio is a misto book. All the authors of this book are misti. I would say the author of the book, Francesca Cadel, has a misto gaze on this. I just want to say, this is a book that is titled Dai Quaranta ai Settanta, from the 40s to the 70s. So it's a book about what here in the US is called like post-46, like post-war Italian literature and culture, right? But no other book about this topic, and I read a few, will tackle the immense task of trying to give a sense to this senseless age, from unification to the assassination of Moro, through these authors. Francesca Cadel chose a personal canon that immediately, when you read this book, becomes your personal canon. I would say that, yes, Pasolini is this backbone, is this center of gravity. And of course, we never met before, me and Francesca, thank you for the trust of inviting me to present your book, but I knew you as a Pinocchio scholar and as a Pasolini scholar, which are very, anybody who is those two things at the same time. Miste is to be trusted, right? And I love that, yes, Pasolini is at the center. Yes, there is this epiphany of Di Donato, and you can read, this is not just a book, but also an archive. You find a translation of an unpublished, come si dice, screenplay, drama about Aldo Moro. You find the painting. You find bits of notes by Di Donato, and I have something to say about that because I think I figured out the year it must have met Pasolini, perché then I'm going to say you. But what excites me is that at the origin of this Cadel-like, this special, misto, unique, anomalo, personal second half of the 20th century in Italy, the fountainhead is Umberto Saba. Yes. Now, if you've been trained in Italy, Umberto Saba is not a post-war Italian author. Umberto Saba is with Ungaretti and Montale on the first half of the 20th century. And I see Eugenio is smiling because we're planning on writing a textbook of Italian literature, and these are some of the questions that we have. Why are we automatically putting Saba in this tradition of modernismo, whatever it is the weird guy, is the anomalo guy around Montale and Ungaretti, who are the more normal ones, and after Futurism and before whatever. Why do we confine Saba in that role when he is a father, a fountainhead, a weird, queer, half Jewish, half Christian, half Italian, half Slavic, from Friuli, Venezia Giulia, from Trieste, this weird place, who was not Italy when he was born and was not Italy after the war, right? This absurd figure that is impossible to explain, that is impossible to translate as well, I would say. And it's, in fact, not translated into it. Like the book is a bit of a fraud. The book by Saba that is translated, the Canzoniere, songbook, it's not real. The most important poems are missing because they're so hard to tackle. Ecco, I'll stop. I just want to say, putting that figure as the fountainhead of a tradition, of a certain kind, of a certain brand of post-war Italian culture is such a cool move. And considering Saba as the beginning of this kind of genealogy, a queer kinship that goes through from Saba to Pasolini seamlessly. It's wonderful. There's kind of an entrelacement in between the first two chapters. First chapter is Saba, but it ends with Pasolini. And then we start with Pasolini, and again, it's not the typical Pasolini. It's Pasolini in America, right? Pasolini in New York. You start from New York. And then moving to Elsa Morante. And in the meantime, talking about Penna, talking about the aspects of Pasolini's career that are the least investigated, this obsession with Pound that then comes back. You're always interested in the weird, even in the weirdest authors. So I just wanted to know, how did you compose the book? We were talking before, Giuseppe and I said it's an arabesco, no, what did I say, an affresco? And Giuseppe said, well, it's not really an affresco, it's more of a tela di ragno, a spider web. And I was thinking, maybe tapestry, but how do you translate that in Italian? Weird. But I was wondering if you can tell us, like this kind of puzzle, it's not teleological, it's not a lineage, and yet it is kind of an anomalous tradition that has a point of beginning and a point of end, not just in history, but also in poetics.
Well, thank you, Alessandro. So I would like to say this cover was a gift to me because what he just said, this is the graphic, I can't remember his name, he's a young graphic at Mimesis, and I had no idea. He made this little figure that, as you said, in sort of, this equilibrium of course, he's trying to walk like that, but I'm not walking, I'm just following, first of all, the text that I've been teaching a lot. So when I was teaching at Yale, it was the early 2000 up to 2009, when I taught graduate students, I did focus on Saba, Pasolini, and Morante, and I had this deep interest in the Scorciatoie Raccontini because they were misunderstood. They were considered by the major critics this sort of silly thing, and then the question of the Shoah, the parallel with the Benedetti, and to me, for some reason, it was so clear what he was saying about Majdanek and the use of the metaphors that certainly were unacceptable, probably for the majority of people, when he wrote the book. So he started writing the scorciatoia in the 1930s. There were issues of censorship, issues of exile. He went to Paris, he went to Florence. Then he published the book, first on Europa, the journal, in 1945. And then the book came out in 1946. And I think it's an amazing book. Like he would say to his daughter, this is like what Voltaire wrote. And,
Il libro del Novecento.
Esatto. And this anti-Novecento, well, first of all, both of you, I'm really grateful because I'm old enough. And so I'm, you're just a little bit younger, but like there is in the book an autobiographic element, and it's my geography. I come from that part. And then, Saba was relevant to me just because I love Trieste. I love all these kind of things. So, it's my understanding of something that could have been different, specifically La Questione Giuliana. So, we don't all read Italian, but among the letters that I read and comment, there is this amazing comment on if Umberto Saba would have been the governor of the Trieste. So the question of races for Saba was the only questions, whereas a governant, he would keep the death penalty. And specifically, he was addressing the Slav and the Italian situation. So all that, my father was born 1916. I grew up with this sort of problematic that is the geopolitics of the Northeast. But then my academic life was in the US, and the book actually came out thanks to my grateful years in Canada that gave me this sort of faraway perspective in a sense. But I'm absolutely grateful to Canada, to University of Calgary, who allowed me to finance all my research. There is, I published many other things, Pinocchio, I collaborated with several scholars, I interviewed, but basically this is my second, book just of myself. And so there is this sort of, if you want to call it un po' adolescenziale myself, Toni Negri used to say we never end being adolescent. So the books I comment are the books specifically for Morante, I read as a teenager. So, there is all that, certainly not Aracelli. Aracelli came later. But there is that part that is also discussing my relationship with Italy, and specifically the part on Aldo Moro was very painful for me because translating that text took me certainly a year. And I wake up 5 a.m. because I love it, and I work from 5 to 10, and I'm happy. But that text was so intense. So I'm grateful to specifically Luigi Bonafini, who helped me with the slang, the beautiful English of Di Donato, which is also when he speaks an English that is embedded in his other languages, so Abruzzese, but the biblical terms, is very, very specific sarcasm, is slang, and also it was difficult at the beginning because Di Donato loves women, but like the comments are often, or the jerk or the words are difficult today, 2025. So I had I'm very grateful to Richard Di Donato and Peter Di Donato, but I spoke specifically with Richard, so he could help me understand certain things. But for me, that was a lot. So the part that was also kind of joyful was the discovery that Wilson McLean is alive. He's a wonderful, wonderful illustrator, and still, he used to be in the 60s or 70s. There was a group called the Monkeys, because he was also painting the covers of the long planes or things like that. So sort of, if you Google Wilson McLean, it's amazing what he did. And so when I met him, we went with my son and a friend in Upper New York State. It was incredible. He said, "You're the first person in 40 years who asked me about this painting." And he had it in his basement. And he came out with this lovely, it's probably 150 centimeters, sorry, not too big. And is just adorable, and is not giving it to me.
Facciamo tipo ping pong.
Yeah, we can follow instead. In fact, but not on Di Donato, which concludes, as you said, the book. I would like to go back to Pasolini, perhaps to stop a little about what you say about Pasolini's reaction to the city of New York. I read something in the book by him and of him that I didn't know. His desire of coming back to New York in the past, coming back to New York when he would be younger, in order to start all over again. Because Pasolini found in New York a city very congenial to his, I won't say politics, but definitely to his philosophy of life. Is that right? Would you like to tell us a little more about it?
Yes. So I just wanted to say, if you're not aware, this year at the Pasolini Archives in Casa, there was actually a photographic exhibit on Pasolini in New York, and there were Andy Warhol serigraphies, so it was kind of nice. So they discussed about that. And so in the chapter on Pasolini, I focus on his fascination for the United States. And his first trip to New York was in 1966. He had first gone to Montreal. I think it was Uccellacci Uccellini, and then he came to the New York Film Festival. And then he came back the last time in 1968, and it was or 69, and that sort of fascination was kind of over. But the first time he came, he was, I don't know if he was hosted, but received by his friend Oriana Fallaci, and then Richard Avedon. There are all these pictures. There is this interview Oriana Fallaci made with Pasolini about his, first reactions to New York, that are what you were saying, that probably some of us who came to the States, to New York from Italy, I don't know, in the 60s even more, we are surprised, and he was so surprised to find the words he used are words that relate to brotherhood. So brotherhood, he lost a brother. I don't know how many of you are aware. He had a younger brother, and he was killed by actually communists during the resistance in Italy. He was in the group of Partito d'Azione. I don't go into the details. Once again, the northeast of Italy. You'll never stop finding incredible, complicated story. But here he comes, killed by the communists, and then Pasolini becomes a communist. When he came to New York, he met Allen Ginsberg for the first time. Oh, first he had met him maybe in Milan with Fernanda Pivano. I don't remember now. But anyway, he found a lot of things that were unexpected to him. And Fallaci says, oh, yet again, another Italian who thinks he came here and he found the communist revolution. But it's not the case. But the very, very fascination he had was also for the world he found when at night he would go to Harlem. He met some radicals, some people of the Black Panthers. So he then basically immediately, the very first time he came back, it was August 1966, he wrote one of those I consider the most important analytical essays Pasolini wrote. The title is Guerra Civile, Civil War. And in this civil war, he sees, and he will develop this concept in, Per un'Orestea de Africane, and he sees the US as the only place where eventually a class struggle and a communist revolution could happen. That's his idea. He develops that in several works, specifically in an unfinished work that is amazing, translated in English by Elizabeth Castelli. She's from Calgary, Canada, but she teaches at Barnard College, and that's St. Paul. It's an amazing text. It's a text of, a radical Christianity. Alain Badiou did an amazing reading of this text, comparing the idea of a revolution to the idea of the first Christians. And so there is this radical figure that is basically Martin Luther King. And Martin Luther King, because in this transposition, New York is Rome. Rome is Jerusalem. No, Paris. Anyway, the cities are all Paris is Jerusalem and Rome is Constantinople. Faccio confusione. Anyway, there are all these, once again, with Pasolini at the beginning is a little bit of a headache or a toothache because you have to remember. And once you remember, he starts with this, situation where the first Christians following Paul are basically resistance, but in France. So Paul, I don't go into the details, but I discussed that because that text is one of the first concrete responses to his passion for the United States. And then, of course, he wrote for an African Oresteia. He went a little bit further, discussing the question of what he called negritudine. So I could go on, but basically, I would say there is a misunderstanding, because for sure, in his ideas, the US didn't have a real class struggle, because he considered, for instance, the eccentricity of a poet like Ginsberg as a sort of proof that there is no class struggle. But indeed, there is a misunderstanding in all that. But certainly, even in La Rabbia, he insisted on this concept that it is here that the elites of eventually a sort of revolutionary group can find their inspiration.
As we were talking about this incredible screenplay that one can only dream to see, maybe someone should make the film. I was thinking about the fact that St. Paul has a huge reception in English. Huge. How can it be huge? Something like that. But, much bigger in English than it has in Italian. It is in the Meridiani. We have the edition of it. But here, with the Verso edition that you mentioned, that now is coming out again this year, I think.
Nice.
And it's something that is taught, not just in graduate classes about Italian post-war culture, but, in film classes, in humanities classes for undergrads. And this made me think that, in many ways, your book, Francesca, one could argue that it's a book about America. One could say that it's a book that looks, because I was thinking about the fact that even with Saba, which, has alla fama di essere...
He says, I have no problem with the Americans.
Esatto.
I have a lot of problems with the Italian, the priests. And
I'm happier here, because Trieste after World War II, this is something that a lot of Italians forget. Trieste was one of the areas, along with Sardinia, where the Allies were very present, to the point of making it, how is it called, territorio speciale. But anyway, basically not official. It was
divided in 3 parts and territories. I don't remember.
I don't remember the name, but what's amazing is the way Saba describes it as un paravento tra me e l'Italia, this kind of screen that protects me from Italy. So even with Saba, the most idiosyncratic, difficult to Americanize author ever, your interest goes in that direction and shows how he is in dialogue with Sontag, with Hannah Arendt. There is this kind, the way you read Scorciatoie e Raccontini, it puts Saba in dialogue with the old, Adornian, post-war reflection about not just the Shoah, but how can we be modern and also happy in any way, right? And with Elsa Morante, again, you go into the direction of unmasking also the aspects of Morante that have been lazily ascribed to neorealism, and with Di Donato again. So it's an autobiographical book, and it is a book about America.
Thank you. Well, one thing I would like to say is that several texts where it's not that I resemantaz. I tried to reread the text that I had already read and tried to really understand specifically the pages I analyze in Elsa Morante that are contemporary, because Araceli was written between 1976 and 1982, which means Pasolini was killed on November 2nd, 1975. And this book, Araceli, Araceli is, of course, the name of the Virgin Mary, the name of a place, the name of the mother. It's a lot of things. And so Araceli is the name of the mother of the protagonist in this novel. But the novel starts really in the night Pasolini was killed, and this journey starts there. And the novel is published in 1982, but really there are some oddities there that can only be understood with the contemporaneity with the most violent and dramatic moments of Italian years of Leeds. Of course, Moro's kidnapping and the killing of his bodyguards, and also the not quoted, but like the killing of Roberto Pecci. Roberto Pecci was the brother of Patrizio Pecci, who was the first pentito brigatista, and the last phase of the Red Brigade punished the brother of Patrizio. And so there are elements in the book that, yes, might come up from this memory of Resistenza, but not in my reading, because clearly they are talking about something else, and especially about this uncanny idiosyncrasy with the ideology in Elsa Morante, specifically with the Lettera alle Brigate Rosse, all that. But at the same time, as I tried to say at the end, Italy has a problem of memory. That's when I quote Giovanni Moro, and this idea of this necessity of a reconciliation of memory, at least, because the text that I translated, and that really caused me some pain, as an incredible novelty to me, because it's unpublished before, and in this text, the most important element are no memorial, no letters, but the videos the Red Brigades constantly provided of these dialogues with Negri. So the text, and also when I was at the New York Public Library, with my embarrassment, of course, I ordered a copy of Penthouse magazine, and the cover, it was this soft porn, but also a text that would publish important authors like Di Donato, like many others. So when this first text, I'm not talking about Moro, I'm talking about Christ in Plastic, came out in December 1978, so 4 months after all that, it was already in the records of the Digos, the police, etc. In the Moro Ter, you find everything. And also in that Penthouse, everything is about video camera. So, I became, as Stefano remembers, kind of obsessed with high fever, reading all the huge bibliography on the Moro case. That's not the point. My point at the end of the book is that certain authors really require a different assessment of memory. The first one is certainly Saba. That's when I use Carlo Levi, because Carlo Levi, that today they see might have been a spy, who knows? But Carlo Levi was also, in a sense, the son-in-law, or at least he was the partner of Linuccia, was not only devoted to Saba, but really, and if I read you the page against racism, you'll understand what I'm talking about. He said they should send Saba to the volonterosi, the people that govern the world and have to make peace. He was talking of the Europe of Yalta. But Saba, in the years of Yalta, first of all, he died in the 1956, but he died in a city that he said did not recognize him, so where again, the Democristiani, all that was back. And so all his dreams, because Scorciatoie e Raccontini are, most of all, a great moment of enthusiasm of not only a former suicidal, persecuted individual, finding light, finding hope in the future, and it didn't really go like that.
Definitely not.
Thank you. I will go further with a couple of editorial questions.
Oh yeah, ci sono un sacco di erroretti.
That's not what I'm talking about. So you have been telling us in the book and here now about your personal canon, those choices that you have carved out. And if there will be an American publisher who will want to publish the English edition of this book, but we'll ask you to enlarge, to provide more authors, to give a more, let's say, complete idea of your development of literature from Dai Quaranta e Settanta. Whose work will you include?
Oh, wow, that's a difficult question. Well, first of all, I think I was told, I don't know if it is true, that Anthony Tamburri was planning to publish the Moro in English and using this Italian, so in a bilingual thing. I don't know if it will ever, I don't know if it will ever happen, but I anticipate
Spoiler alert.
it. Well, I would definitely include Ralph Ellison and Philip Roth, because that's where basically I found out that, and so it was a debate on ethnicity at Yeshiva University. And then Seton Hall organized an amazing, and it was available online, now it's no longer available, but when I had this eye fever, of course, I watched everything and the sounds and the registration. And so I listened to Ralph Ellison contribution, Philip Roth's contribution, and I can tell you that Pietro Donato, not only because I was fond of him, but he was by far the most radical and the most sincere in analyzing the post-war society, where he was still a mason, because he always he kept buying buildings, building buildings, fare il muratore, and so he would report without judgment, basically, the common talk of the people coming from all possible backgrounds, where racism and anti-Semitism was still there. And so he would say things like with this, I mean, this is an amazing debate, and it was an amazing, and so I would include that. I would include certainly Ralph Ellison. And then, yeah, more women, because of course I'm very fond, but I have to find a way to do that, because Goliarda Sapienza with l'Università di Rebibbia is a completely different text, but there is still this representation of the reality of brigatismo in Italia, because the text by Di Donato, which is also a surreal text, those who have read it are shocked, because there is the great passion the Italian-American writers have, for instance, for the Vatican scandals, the lover of Paolo VI, this and that. It's amazing. But there are these three incredible characters. One is Nora. Nora is Aldo Moro's wife. And the other is Paolo VI. And certainly, I mean, I think, because this text had been translated in 2022, I think, as Cristo tra i brigatisti. So I think that Marco Bellocchio, who has, we had a dialogue, but he said, I didn't know Di Donato, but like, it's almost impossible, I don't know, whatever, because there is this original understanding. No, but it's just a good thing to say that, you know, he certainly must have heard of him, because in this story, The Christ in Plastic, there is already this sort of surreal representation of characters and situations, and yet it is Italy. Everything is exaggerated, but like he knew so well what was going on. And then in the amazing archives at Stony Brook, if you are interested in this topic, or in Di Donato, I think they have amazing materials, because they have all his little booklets with his notes, when he was there, all his contacts. There is Pasolini's address, which doesn't correspond to the year, but he probably was there before. There is Elsa Morante. There is this, even a story that is published by The Sun on the website, where Elsa Morante is a prostitute, basically, and she tells when, you know, he has all this peculiarity about Italian society that I found extremely interesting. Yeah.
There's no way Bellocchio didn't read Di Donato. Especially the last show he did, the TV show that he did on Moro, when he redid, I don't remember the title that it had, the one that is basically Buongiorno Notte on steroids. Interno, no, exactly. Esterno Notte. The Cossiga episode is so Di Donato, no? That oniric moment. It's impossible.
Or Andreotti che vomita.
Andreotti che vomita sulle
is here. So,
it's very cool.
know.
But people like artists. If artists said all the truth and knew everything about themselves, we wouldn't be here, right?
No, but
we wouldn't
there
have
is
a job.
point on Di Donato. I do feel for him because I think he's been misunderstood in some ways as like the bitterness he must have experienced after his very first novel, so Christ in Concrete, and then Give Us Our Day, the movie by Dimitri in 1949. And so Di Donato was suddenly very famous, and then, there was like not the same production, and so probably went through a lot. And I spoke with people who met him, and so they remember how he was maybe unpleasant. Maybe, I don't know, I don't say names, but he said, your hands don't, your hands are clean, my hands are the hands of a real worker. So he had all these aspects. But if you go online, there is this documentary, 2007, Lo scrittore muratore. And I adore him, the way he speaks, the way he is. So that's me. And then, I read Cristo Tra I Muratori, and I brought the latest edition because it was immediately translated by the wife of Amendola, but this is in 2022. And so he has, in Italy as in here, fan scatenati, or those who have never heard of him, like me before. So it's interesting because this book, I started because I was teaching, then I was called to it, and so I started promoting the book just last June. And there was this interview, Radio Onde Furlane, it's very important in Friuli, but everybody was like, who's Pietro Di Donato? They would call me, or they really were fond of Pietro. And so I think he's a character that deserves, here there is Gardafè, there are all these people, but not in Italy, right?
And especially in this time, in this moment of the attacks on migration and what it means, and the attacks on everything that is misto, these aspirations to purity that sadly are in a recrudescence all over the world. An author like this, with the combination of this fervor, it's a kind of weird non-queer Pasolini, like this kind of profoundly Catholic and profoundly radical at the same time. It's quite amazing. Speaking of this, may I ask a difficult question? And then maybe there's time for another question, and then I don't know if we open to the public, but I'll leave this to you. I just wanted to ask you a difficult question about, you were talking about more women. Misogyny is one of the protagonists of this book.
Yes.
Like all of the authors that you talk about, and you are very open about it, you're very transparent about it. Many of them are either queer or obsessed with queerness. No, Morante, biographically, we don't care, but as an author, like L'Isola di Arturo is the queerest. Like as you say, is a kind of Agostino venuto meglio, right? And Aracelli is a masterpiece of queer Italian literature. It's so like the closetedness that is at the center of that book is also a metaphor. It makes you feel the history in a completely different way. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about, clearly as a feminist, one reads you and one knows immediately that you're a feminist, interested in queer, weird authors that are on the boundary. How do you reconcile with the crazy misogyny that all of these authors clearly manifest?
Well, thank you. And as a friend and as a scholar of Michela Murgia, of course, that's the problem, that it is how many years ago. And yet an amazing author, an amazing woman like Michela Murgia was a victim of that waves of call it as you want, but like it's real, it's physical. So the choices I made were a little bit camouflage. So I didn't use any frame. For instance, Gianmario Villalta, I'm presenting it at Pordenone Legge, he said, non c'è metodo. Because non c'è metodo, meaning I am not following a frame, now I'm going to read this text as this theories. But the point is that for Morante, misogyny was really the topic of L'Isola di Arturo. And when I quote the letter that she received from Saba himself, telling her, your problem is that you don't have a child, and that, etc., terrible, and he has suggestions, etc. But at the same time, I try to show in a non-judgmental way that there is no purest soul than Saba, who always talks about his own pregnancies. When he writes Ernesto, which is, if you don't know, a masterpiece, and it's a posthumous text about his initiations to both heterosexuality and homosexuality. It's an amazing text, a text on Trieste before unity, etc. Anyway, he has all these, plus he was influenced by Sex and Character, his readings, this and that. So misogyny is there all the time. I mean, Moravia, in a letter of 1927 to his aunt, rightly so, I think, says that women, at least the women he knew, did not deserve to vote because he represented them as, the quintessential bourgeois stupidity. He is having this conversation, but he certainly applies misogyny all the time. So I would like to include a dialogue between these forces. And I don't think that for as much as it is really painful, it's painful for Morante, it's painful certainly for Goliarda, Sapienza, that is not in the book. But it's so real that I really discuss Notte di Cabiria because there is the very important contribution of Pierpaolo Pasolini to the script, and I think that movie is a well-merited Oscar as a best foreign film, but the script is an analysis of women's condition by men, because there is Pasolini, there is l'autore di Melampo. Anyway, they are men, but at the same time, Cabiria lives this obsession. She's a prostitute, but the obsession of la casa, not only the room of one's own, the dream of somebody who's going to marry her. It's an amazing, I think, representation of the real condition of women. And so, yeah, I would make some changes.
All right. Benissimo. Shall we... How much time do we have?
Yep.
Vogliamo aprire?
If you would like, anyone has a question to the author?
I'm sorry, the book is in Italian and not available.
Yet.
That's another amazing thing that only in New York can happen. An Italian author writing about Italian literature saying, I'm sorry, the book is in Italian. That's wonderful. It really shows.
Francesca, in your moment of euphoria for these discoveries, you were fascinated by this theatrical piece that was written, repeated, because it's very important, in the moment in which Moro was kidnapped and held prisoner by the Red Brigade, and Di Donato was in Rome.
So, thank you for this question, Stefano. I can clarify, maybe I wasn't. So, the thing he wrote when he was sent to Rome in May 1978 for Penthouse magazine was called Christ in Plastic, a short story published in December 1978. What I found out, thanks to, because I didn't know, it was Christine Nitre who said, hey, by the way, we have this and this. It's a 115 pages script that was unpublished for theater, meant for theater, but there is a letter to Martin Scorsese, they were friends, and he says, Marty, I have something that could be perfect for you, never followed up, but they were friends. And also De Niro, this is the son who told me used to go, so this elite of Italian Americans knew Di Donato. But so to go back to your question, the text I translated is the second one. He produced and finished at the end of November 1979. When you really become, like I was obsessed with the Moro case, you know that then is when then they found Il Memoriale, un anno dopo. Cioè, all these weird coincidences and time elements in the case are I don't know what was. He certainly, and it is in the archives, knew some people involved with the Red Brigade, so he had some contacts. There are letters proving his real pain. Also, he fell sick and never went back to Italy after that. But from what I read in the archives, he thought about that for a long time. He died in 1992. So.
And Francesca, what is different in the play by Di Donato on the Moro affair from the other many representations of that crucial moment in Italian history that we've seen? Tu Bellocchio, but many others, and theater, and there is the one-man show with Fabrizio Gifuni in which he becomes Moro, basically, on the stage. What is so specific of Di Donato? What caught your attention in the way in which this American... Italian-American retells this story?
Well, exactly the temporary distance between me, I was born 1966, and the text, finding this text that was written during 1978, 1979, and all the rest is the problem of memory Italy has, meaning we are discussing the representations of Bellocchio, the theatrical representation of Gifuni, etc. But, you know, we're talking about something 30, 40, 50 years later. What shocked me was that this guy who was there had this incredibly deep understanding of what was going on. The text, the 115 pages, has several drafts. In some drafts, I found absolutely the passage of Moro at the beach. Things that, you know, if you are with this high fever, you read Altamura, you read all possible bibliography that know everything. But 50 years later, well, how Di Donato knew all that, how Di Donato started talking about il circuito chiuso, that of course La Notte della Repubblica, if you follow the interview to Moretti, to other brigatisti, they say, yeah, we had circuito chiuso, so Moro was filmed all the time. Then Di Donato in the play is obsessed with TV. That was absent, of course, we didn't see Moro on TV. We were told a letter here, a letter there, the memorial 10 years later. It's crazy. So, I don't know. I was really shocked by the, let's say, authenticity. At the same time, the text is super surreal. And also, it's a sort of an encyclopedia because, for instance, it tells a lot about the 70s and the killings of students, things I didn't even remember if you read the text, when there is the process. The process tomorrow is represented exactly as it was said by Signorile lately, by a volto collettivo. So it's not one person, it's not Mario Moretti or Zuccor talking to Moro. There are several people that have several questions and have several accusations. They don't accuse him personally, but in the name of the government. And so that representation, because I read it, a few years ago, was shocking me because how could he know all these things? So,
Francesca, as far as you know, it was never represented on stage.
So never represented by Richard Di Donato would love to see it represented, even just as a reading. He has a dream to see it represented in New York and in Rome, so in English and in Italian. That's what he told me. I would be very happy. He would be very happy.
Are we closing it up? Is it?
No other questions without recording.
Thank you very much for your presentation, and just hearing you describe how you just went into a bit of a rabbit hole during your research and how enthusiastic It's just a delight to hear about it because it just shows how passionate you can be for a certain topic. I suppose a question that I have, what was because there were, you did describe there were many things that either shocked you, surprised you. What was one in particular that did that, but also delighted you in maybe in a very strong way, if one could say that?
Thank you. Well, the translation for me was complicated. First of all, because I had to keep that tension that you can hear English is not my mother language, but I can appreciate an highly sophisticated, because it is sophisticated, is text. There are a lot of quotes from biblical quotes, this and that. So the violence was represented through a sort of analytical reasoning on the violence in Italy. So it's when there is the process, there is, today they are more fashionable, or I don't know, more known because Governo Meloni, this and that, so there are the black, the reds, and we remember these killings, those killings, but in that text they are all together. The part that I call encyclopedic is when all these voices that are interrogating or accusing Aldo Moro remind him of all the killings, of all this and that. And so that part really shocked me because there were episodes I didn't know. And I thought, or the fusion he makes between the US imaginary of violence, so what was the name, La ragazza con la mitraglietta, the syndrome, Stockholm Syndrome, but specifically the character, the very wealthy character that was, anyway, he uses her, yes, sorry, Patty Hearst is always there, and she is a sort of a climax in this text when Di Donato is trying to always defend the youth and defend this energy that the youth has when there is rebellion, when there is violence, so he's always trying to show this sort of engine that the youth have in, for instance, is never apologetic of the Red Brigades, but he does understand the Red Brigades as a real movement and a real, especially in his notebooks, I found all that, because he absolutely identifies with what he calls the faith of the first Christian, how he even remembers in an interview in the 80s when he's called to answer about, ethics and the Red Brigades and killing people. He said, I even asked one of them, why do you throw your life like that? And the answer was, he couldn't do differently. And in this sense, this is a text of the late 70s, not far from Guerra Civile of Pasolini, where Pasolini, though, makes a parallel between the passion of the young American he found in New York in 1966, African-American, and his brother, who was killed in 1945. And so there is this sort of in Pasolini, there is this identification within himself of something that is happening. For me, as I said, I admire Di Donato because he's always on the side of, the victims of class struggle, basically, and so he shows that.
If I may, I've noted an interesting parallel between Pasolini, who comes to New York and thinks that the new revolution, the actual revolution, can happen in New York. Di Donato, who goes to Rome and see actually that the revolution is happening in Rome, because these are integralists. That I wonder what is the original title with which he calls the revolution in the play. But it is clear that he is, and it is clear also in the letters and in the pizzini that you transmit here,
those are amazing,
that he is on the side of the Red Brigades.
But not only he, he witnessed that the great majority, or I don't know, here there are, I see Silvana, I see Nadia, like older people maybe can remember that people were all against, but according to Di Donato, the reality of the Italian society was not the reality after censorship. Today we can say, yes, the memory is the memory of Pippo Baudo. Good luck with Pippo Baudo, maybe, but maybe not. There is an amazing book that just came out about the biography of Dura, so Genova. It's Sangue e Furore, biography of the Red Brigade. So going deeply into the lives of these people who disappeared, they are all dead now, almost all. Fiore just died, Balzerani died, Franceschini died. So there is no memory. I'm not here to say we need, many of them spoke a lot, etc. But there is also a problem of a sort of lapse between the moment when these things were happening and then what you were asking me, the 2020 when Marco Bellocchio, or 2003, his first movie. But to go back to where revolution is possible, you know where he thought the real paradise? Long Island. There is an unpublished text. The unpublished text is entitled Long Island, and you have it at the archives. And it's so moving because for him, Long Island is the expression of all this ethnicity together, and he totally idealizes Long Island. He represents Long Island from the point of view of the Masons and the workers, and it's an amazing text. So he says, it's here. It's just a matter of time.
Alle porte di New York. If I may add, something that excites me about this archive is that, like, the enthusiasm that the person from the public was talking about is affecting. Now, when one reads especially that chapter that is the one about your most recent research, one can feel it, and you publish photos that are clearly your photos that you took with your phone, I think, in the archive
yes, you're
of
right.
the Pizzini. And one
Terrible
of them,
photo.
I wanted to tell you, I'm very proud of telling you in public, that I was so affected by your enthusiasm that I started doing research on your research. And there is a note that Di Donato takes before going to Italy and preparing for the people that he wants to meet. And it is written Pier Paolo Pasolini, and then an address, and then a phone number. And then there's written, call Monday, February the 4th. And you say, well, we don't know if they met. Well, since February the 4th is my birthday, I went on the calendars app and I went back to the 70s. The only year of the 70s in which February the 4th is a Monday is 1974. So it's before Pasolini died, so I bet they met.
Oh, wow. Well, that's what Kirsten says. She says there is no year in the booklet.
Certo. It's not 1978, which is the big trip.
Yes.
I believe it. I believe you went to 1974, or at least they called.
Those archives are
They talked on the phone.
Yes.
Very cool.
Thank you.
Ecco.
Just a technical clarification. So was any part of the script ever published?
Not Moro. No, not in English.
So is it dated by?
Yes, it's November 30th, 1979 is when it was completed, and it's available in English at the archives, and the only time it was published in Italian. As I said, I hope that Anthony Tamburri, as he said, is going to publish it in English with the Italian translation, so in a bilingual.
So it was published in Italian?
It's here.
Okay.
That's what we are presenting. Yes.
Okay. So
it's the fourth and last chapter.
Okay. So was never published. You
No.
had the
No, I
manuscript,
found it,
and the
yes.
manuscript was dated.
Yes.
Okay. Just curiosity. Thank
Yes.
you.
And there is, to go a little bit further, a very important part of photography that I couldn't publish there. And the photographer who was accompanying him in the first trip was Stefano Ruggero. I tried to do research. He's probably alive, from Sicily. And they were photographing, for instance, Il Fioraio, all these characters that are quoted, or the scene in Via Fani. There are plenty of amazing pictures, and this very important picture of Di Donato with an important leader of the Communist Party. And there are many, many documents that are relevant. I just translated the text.
If there are no other questions, I can just remind you that there are 8 copies, and 8 copies only, of Francesca Cadel's new book, Dai Quaranta e Settanta. They're upstairs for you to purchase, and Francesca will sign them for you. Francesca, grazie mille for having shared with us your research, and to Professor Gazzola and Giammei for being here with us and bringing to spirit, passion, and enthusiasm for this. Thank you.